Welcome to Brainish English Stories.
In a small room lit by a candle, a man was reading an old, worn-out account book. The writing was hard to read, so he moved the book close to the candle to see better. In the room, 8 other men were there too. 7 of them sat quietly near the rough walls, while the 8th man lay on the table, covered by a sheet. He was dead. The man reading wasn't speaking aloud, and everyone was quiet. They seemed to be waiting for something. All the noises of the night outside, like the howling of a distant coyote, the sounds of insects, and the cries of night birds, came in through the window. But the men inside didn't pay much attention to those sounds. They were from the area, farmers and woodworkers. The one reading was a bit different. He looked like he was from the city. His clothes were different from the others. He was wearing a hat that had a meaning beyond just decoration. He had a somewhat stern look on his face, which might have been because of his job. He was the coroner. He had the book he was reading because it was found among the dead man's things in his cabin, where they were holding the inquest. After he finished reading, he put the book in his pocket. Just then, a young man entered the room. He didn't look like he was from the mountains, he was dressed like someone from the city. His clothes were dusty from traveling. He had hurried there to attend the inquest. The coroner nodded at him, but no one else greeted him. "We've been waiting for you," the coroner said. "We need to finish this tonight." The young man smiled. "I'm sorry for keeping you waiting," he said. "I left to write about this for my newspaper. Now I'm back to tell my story." The coroner smiled. "The story you sent to your newspaper," he said, "is probably different from what you'll say here under oath. That's up to you. I wrote it as fiction, not news, because it's hard to believe. But I have a copy of what I sent, and it can be part of my sworn testimony." "But you said it's hard to believe." "It doesn't matter if I swear it's true." The coroner wasn't really affected by the young man's anger. He thought for a moment, then looked at the floor. The men on the sides of the cabin whispered to each other, but kept their eyes on the dead body. Finally, the coroner looked up and said, "Let's continue the inquest." The men took off their hats. The witness was sworn in. "What's your name?" the coroner asked. "William Harker." "How old are you?" 27. "You knew the deceased, Hugh Morgan?" "Yes." "You were near him when he died?" "Close by." "How did you end up there?" "Why were you with him?" "I came to visit him, to hunt and fish. But also, I wanted to study him and his unique way of life. He seemed like a good character for a story. I write stories sometimes. I read stories sometimes." "Thank you. Not just yours, but stories in general." "Tell us how this man died," the coroner said. "You can use your notes or anything you have." The witness understood. He pulled out a manuscript and held it close to the candle. Flipping through the pages, he found the part he wanted and began to read. The sun had just come up when we left the house. We were hunting for quail, each with a shotgun, and we had only one dog. Morgan said the best place to hunt was beyond a certain ridge, which he pointed to. We crossed the ridge through the bushes. On the other side, the ground was flat and covered with wild oats. As we came out of the bushes, Morgan was a little ahead. Suddenly, we heard a noise like some animal moving around in the bushes to the right in front of us. We could see the bushes moving a lot. "We scared a deer," I said. "I wish we had brought a rifle." Morgan stopped and was watching the bushes closely. He didn't say anything, but he had readied his gun to shoot. I thought he seemed a bit excited, which surprised me because he was known for being very calm even in dangerous situations. "Oh, come on," I said. "You're not going to use birdshot on a deer, are you?" But he didn't answer. When I looked at his face, I saw that he was pale. Then I realized that something serious was happening. I thought maybe we had disturbed a grizzly bear. I walked up to Morgan, ready to shoot as well. The bushes were quiet now, and the noise had stopped. But Morgan was still watching. "What is it? What's going on?" I asked. "That damn thing," he replied, not looking at me. His voice sounded strange and shaky. He was visibly trembling. I was about to ask more questions when I saw the wild oats near the disturbance moving in a strange way. It's hard to describe. It was like the wind was blowing them, but it wasn't just bending them, it was pushing them down, like something was crushing them. And this movement was coming toward us, getting closer. I can't really explain it. So now, seeing the grass moving for no reason and the line of movement coming toward us was really unsettling. Morgan seemed actually scared, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing when he suddenly lifted his gun and shot both barrels into the moving grass. As the smoke cleared, I heard a loud, savage cry like an animal scream. Morgan dropped his gun and ran away from the spot. At the same time, something unseen hit me hard and threw me to the ground. Before I could stand up and grab my gun, which seemed to have been knocked out of my hands, I heard Morgan crying out like he was in intense pain. Mixed with his cries were hoarse, savage sounds like the noises fighting dogs make. Terrified, I got up and looked where Morgan had run to, and I hope I never see anything like that again. Less than 30 yards away, my friend was on one knee, his head thrown back at an unnatural angle, his hair messy, and his body moving violently back and forth. He had lost his hat, and he was moving so much that I couldn't see his arms clearly. Sometimes, I could only see part of his body, as if he was fading away. This happened really quickly, maybe just a few seconds. During that time, Morgan went through all the motions of a wrestler being defeated by someone stronger. I only saw him, and even then, not clearly all the time. Through all this, he was yelling and cursing like nothing I had ever heard before, like the sounds of anger and fury from a man or an animal. For a moment, I stood there not sure what to do. Then, I dropped my gun and ran to help my friend. I thought he was having some kind of fit or seizure. But before I could reach him, he fell and was quiet. All the sounds had stopped. But then, with a feeling of terror that was even worse than before, I saw the same strange movement in the grass moving from where Morgan had fallen to the edge of the woods. Only after it reached the woods could I look away. When I finally turned to look at Morgan, he was dead. The coroner stood up and went over to the dead man, uncovering his body fully. The body looked clay yellow under the candlelight. There were blue-black spots on the body, caused by bruised blood. The body had terrible cuts and the skin was torn in pieces. The coroner then moved to the head of the table and removed a silk handkerchief that was tied around the neck. When the handkerchief was taken away, it revealed the throat, which had been horribly injured. Some of the jurors who had stood up to get a closer look regretted their decision and turned away. Witness Harker went to the window, feeling faint and sick. The coroner dropped the handkerchief on the dead man's neck and went to a corner of the room. He picked up various items of clothing from a pile and showed them to the jurors one by one. All the clothes were torn and stained with blood. The jurors didn't examine them closely, seeming uninterested. This was all familiar to them except for Harker's testimony. "Gentlemen," the coroner spoke, "I believe we have no more evidence. Your duty has been explained to you. If you have no further questions, you may step outside and consider your verdict." The foreman, a tall, bearded man in his 60s, stood up and asked, "I have one question, Mr. Coroner. Which mental institution did this last witness escape from?" "Mr. Harker," the coroner addressed him, "which asylum did you recently escape from?" Harker blushed deeply but didn't say anything. The 7 jurors stood up and left the cabin solemnly, walking out in a line. "If you're done insulting me, sir," Harker said to the officer once they were alone with the dead man, "I assume I can leave?" "Yes." Harker started to leave, but paused, his hand on the door latch. His professional instincts were strong, stronger than his personal pride. He turned back and asked, "The book you have there, I recognize it as Morgan's diary. You seemed very interested in it. You were reading it while I was giving my testimony. May I see it?" "The book won't matter in this case," the official replied, putting it into his coat pocket. All the entries in it were made before the writer's death. As Harker left the house, the jury came back in and stood around the table. The foreman sat down near the candle, took a pencil and a piece of paper from his pocket, and wrote the following verdict with some effort. All of them signed it to varying degrees. "We, the jury, find that the remains were killed by a mountain lion, although some of us still think they had seizures." In the late Hugh Morgan's diary, there are some interesting entries that might have scientific value as suggestions. During the inquest on his body, the book was not presented as evidence. Perhaps the coroner decided it wasn't necessary to confuse the jury. The date of the first entry is unknown. The upper part of the page is missing. This is what Morgan had written before his death. My dog is behaving strangely. He barks and turns around again and again. He looks at something that isn't there. Later, he ran into the bushes as fast as he could. At first, I thought he might have gone mad. September 2nd, last night, while watching the stars rise above the hill, I saw something. It passed between me and the stars, but I couldn't see it. Am I going crazy? September 27th. That strange invisible thing is back around here. I find signs of its presence every day. I stayed up all night, hidden in the same spot, with a loaded gun. In the morning, fresh footprints were there again, just like before. I would have sworn that I didn't sleep at all. My sleep is quite disturbed. This is unbearable, intolerable. If these strange experiences are real, I'll go insane. If they're just in my head, I'm already mad. October 3rd. I won't leave because of this thing. No, this is my house, my land. October 5th. I can't take it any longer. I've invited Harker to stay with me for a few weeks. Maybe he'll find an answer. Maybe he'll see the thing too. October 7th. I've figured out the answer to this mystery. It came to me suddenly last night, as if by revelation. It's so simple, terrifyingly simple. There are sounds that we can't hear. Colors are like sounds in this way. Our human eyes are limited, they can only see a small range of colors in the chromatic scale. I'm not insane, there are colors we're blind to. And, God help me, the damned thing is one of those colors.